Finishing where we left off last week, this episode was mainly about showing the last remaining performances and then totaling up the category winners at the end. So I won't get too far in depth about the recap, but this show basically starts with some hype editing to get you into the episode you're about to watch, and then it tells you it's episode 7, Together It Is Better. Then we just get straight into team packages. The first team is the Law Team. They came out and their outfits were okay, actually. I didn't really see anything wrong there. It was just like a mix of militaristic and kind of like an 80s fitness thing with some scars on their faces. But in the interim checks, Han Yujin, he was worried about feedback from Mihawk as usual. And it really seemed like he was traumatized by the idea of it. But as they performed, in addition to feedback about kind of not copying the original version or else they couldn't compete, Han Yujin did get praise for his original choreo that he did. And, I actually thought he was going to bawl his eyes out, but he kind of held it together. And he just genuinely gained some kind of self-esteem. With the self-evaluation, it turns out there were several errors by Yujin and Yidam, and the team basically ranked last in their category according to other trainees, which of course kind of lit a fire under the Angles dictator, Park Bin, who made the practice a little bit tougher going forward from there. They made him repeat things over and over, probably until they could do it in their sleep. Now, with the actual performance, it started out a bit average at about a 7.3 for me, but continuously it rose to an 8.3 with no real errors, as far as I could see. And I thought the face expressions were on point, but I barely noticed Wang Zihao here. And at some point, I started to get the feeling that, the group, it kind of felt a bit lacking in the center. And as good as they were, it actually became a white noise performance to me. And it's funny because, I'm looking at my notes from last week, and I actually said that while I was checking the original version of the song, I mentioned that the song becoming white noise would be a pitfall for them. And so, I'm looking at these guys and I'm asking myself, is Lee Yidam really pulling off the killing part? Seems I wasn't the only one who noticed, because Yidam, he ranked 5th with a 608, and he was actually wondering if he was invisible. Whereas Park Han-bin got the top score at 757. And the truth is, even if he did get a low audience score, Yidam was still someone who got more airtime than Wang Zihao. The next team up was Man in Love Team with Kim Tae-rae and his 3 little bears. They were dressed like high school boys in the mall, which I hoped would be fine in the end. With interim checks, the team was a bit sloppy. It's almost like they didn't care. Woojin, he didn't seem to be able to rap, and he was in need of guidance, and Tae-rae got criticized for his dated interpretation. But after the interim checks, they were publicly shown to be the lowest ranking team, which kind of got them more into the spirit of helping each other. Now, don't you think it's amazing that fixing Jun Min-gyu's loud singing problem was as simple as just telling him to cut the volume in half? I feel like that was a lot easier than what they had to do with Woojin, which is they had to kind of coach him into the pocket. In the actual performance, they were okay, but it had a weak start for me at a 7.4, and this eventually rose to a 7.8, but honestly, there were times when, in my opinion, it kind of felt like a high school talent show, which I guess they were appropriately dressed for. And the only time I saw this feeling in myself disappear was during the harmonies with Tae-rae and Dong Yeol. So maybe it was the stage echo that added to the feeling, but despite the fact that you can recognize they were singing well, the sound mixing really made it feel off for me. Maybe the live audience got a better version, but I don't want to blame the boys for this because I was impressed by them. I would actually put this on the crew, legitimately. So after the performance, Kim Tae-rae got the top score at 740. The third team was Rush Hour, and they came out dressed like city boys, and I thought it was alright. Back during song selection, they showed the sign falling when Ricky approached the team, which is kind of funny of an omen for me because, I was just watching this old movie called The Legend of 1900, and there was this short conversation piece about the significance of falling portraits. Behind the scenes, this team had a rough time. Ma Xinjiang, he wanted to practice without discussing the conflict and resolving tensions, and Ricky was pushing hard for creative input on the formations, even in the absence of the leader, Oh Sung-min. It's interesting because a lot of this dilemma seemed to stem from Takuto slowing down the choreo learning progress, but later Takuto crying and his whole admission of fear kind of showed how tensions between Ricky and Jingjiang were making both of them appear scary, and there's like this kind of almost like a tug of war happening here. In rehearsal, the master sensed a lack of chemistry, and the team was not on the same wavelength. So first off, I think it's really telling if people aren't even aware of the value of the intangible force of just getting along with people you perform with. You can't avoid it, but more than that, why would you go on a television show where you are building a boy group, being a part of a team, and then not demonstrating the basic requirements of working in a team? You know, making sacrifices, following a leader. Out of everyone here, Ma Xingjiang probably came out looking the worst because he often refused to communicate in both directions. And it was made more troublesome when someone like Hiroto basically talked about this being his last chance. And even the masters knew how unlucky Hiroto had been in team selection. Hey, hold on, just let me check this bingo card square for bad group ruins a good participant. In the actual performance, it started averagely at a 7.3, slowly climbed to a 7.5, but then dropped a little bit due to it being a bit boring or non-dynamic to me. Then it went up again because of Hiroto and Takuto's tag team, and Takuto did kind of like a half-assed flip, and I was surprised by that. Takuto, he seemed to be missing the beat a little bit. He wasn't in the zone, really. Hiroto's rap section increased the score for me, and then it ended at a 7.7. And I think that may have been generous. Unfortunately, I do think Jay's version during the Star Level test was more interesting to me, and it was memorable. Ricky would get the first place position at 745, and Takuto got one of the lowest scores at a 549. And I really think they missed an opportunity here. You know, last week I said this team had the strongest voting power in their category, but by not doing a kind of like feel-good performance, and you know, they were getting stressed over technicalities, I feel like they abandoned the idea of entertaining the audience just to kind of like worry about the technical stresses that would really only like please a hard-ass judge maybe like me. But I don't think they realized that the judges were also aware of chemistry, and it's not just a technical thing. So the next team is Limousine. In practice, Anthony gave up the leadership to Jihu, who seemed to be better accustomed to it being the best communicator, you know, the native Korean speaker. And while they have the lowest voting power, they actually have some of the better skills collectively. So I expected them to do well, but they needed to pander to the audience here, which is why I kind of suggested theatrics, but actually the boys ended up having something better in mind. So in interim checks, there was this joke about Christian being suddenly docile. But I wouldn't blame him, as he's basically been on this tightrope of not offending his fellow trainees or their voting audience at home, probably due to the evil editing. The masters basically pointed out that the song was not speaking to the boys' experience. And I think this was great advice, because the boys ended up getting together to personalize the lyrics, meaning there was more sincerity, meaning more connection to the audience. And it was a great idea. They basically talked about being evil edited in their lyrics that they wrote themselves. In the actual performance, it started off low at a 6.8, because Anthony, he was kind of off. But Christian and Jihu gave the song more momentum, until the point when Anthony did recover. And once Anthony was rapping, they were putting on an excellent performance and looking comfortable while doing it. It landed at a 7.7 for me. After the performance, Park Ji-hoo got the top score at 795. I feel that was deserved for his authenticity, his lyrics, and the commanding delivery he had. And for me, he was the killing part in spirit. For the Feel Special team, I had high hopes, as once our honor is on the line. Last week, I suggested they alter the song, but I wrongly thought Cha Woon-ki would be the obstacle there. Actually, he was the foundation for this group, even being able to kind of help them pass the finish line. In interim checks, the Chinese members danced a bit lazily and forgot the lyrics. Zhang Shuai-bo weirdly took on the lyrics, thinking he was making a sacrifice for the group as a main vocal, but then suddenly he couldn't do it, and he decided to half-ass things. He called out by the masters on it. When he said he couldn't do it, I furrowed my brow. I'm like, you can't do it? Singing and dancing are the basic premise of your career path, buddy. What? So rehearsal here was kind of tragic. Honestly and weirdly, Kai Jinjing and Zhang Shuaibo even seemed to be blaming Chao Wen-Ki for their troubles, which I think is easily debunked by the fact that Wen-Ki is basically carrying all of them by doing the entire chorus by himself. And just to point out how delusional these guys are, they're in their bedroom and they literally thought the crew would edit them in the way that was opposite of evil. Mnet, by the way, the guys who are so badly intentioned, we call what they do evil editing. No, they thought it would fall into their lap. These guys even got personal attention and training by the masters. So in the actual performance, it was low to start at a 6.8. The whole performance would barely crack a 7.2 to me. I was disappointed as a once, and I just felt like the vocals were weak and they didn't really feel that special, if you get my meaning. Chao Wen-Ki, he did the best he could. I don't blame him. But they could have used harmonies. And, when he was singing there for such a long period and no one else was adding to it, it left a huge void. It was like a huge glaring gap. So after the performance, Zhang Shuaibo got the top score of 703. After which, I said out loud, bogus! On principle, he should have said something like, all this credit goes to Wen-Ki. But it seemed like nobody appreciated him, even though he was holding the group together and stressing on their behalf for them. I feel like Chao Wen-Ki, who sang the whole chorus, should get noticed. And it's just nuts, in my opinion, that if you watch the follow-up second survival announcement show that came the day after the performance show, that he was in the bottom 3 fighting for the last surviving position. Just like the last group, not Spring Love or Cherry Blossom's team, the IU team is actually the lowest ranked group in terms of skills and sincerity. In interim check, the Masters were kind of nice to them. Maybe they had no expectations and just wanted them to have fun, but the main thrust of the criticism was that they needed to go back to conventional role distribution, since at first they tried to just be fair and give everyone equal parts, but then it was just all over the place. I was surprised to see Baek Do-ha get the killing part first, and then Lee Da got the role in a shuffle later on. Feel like the more you see this guy behind the scenes, the less appealing he is as a human being. Actually, in rehearsal, they were all better, though, than I thought they would be. In the actual performance, it started slightly awkwardly at a 7.2, rose to a 7.7 for all of these groups. So I wouldn't compare them side by side. But getting back to it, Jong Ai-chan, he got his redemption. The stage prop and design was weirdly high quality for these guys. Pedals were falling. The room projector was so detailed, it was like 3D animated or something. And, I actually found these guys to be way more watchable than the Man in Love team. So here's me eating my words. Jong Ai-chan can sing, and he can sing well. Lee Da-il's voice isn't so weird when he's singing songs like this. And then Baek Do-ha is actually extremely stable. But after the performance, Jong Ai-chan got 730 and the top performer rank, and Lee Da-il got the lowest score ever of 387. Basically half the highest scores. And, I guess people must have been noticing his attitude a bit. Team Butterfly was the second last to perform. In interim checks, Lim Jun-seo continued to have low confidence, and for other members, there was kind of this weird excessiveness in their delivery. It's kind of like what I say when I say about Lee Ho-taek kind of singing indulgently. But, as I said last week, this team should be stable, and they really weren't due to Lim Jun-seo's hang-ups. In rehearsal, Lim Jun-seo continued to have issues, and his vocal caused the Masters to kind of wear stern and angry faces. Backstage, he ended up crying to Lip J. And honestly, you look back at it, and he was never okay, even before the star level tests. Nobody really knows the perfect solution to fear, but a good place to start is probably being responsible to your teammates. Wanting what's best for them, and I think it's in caring too much for yourself and your own pride that it causes this kind of weird performance anxiety. Obviously he has low self-esteem, but at some point you kind of gotta just let that stuff go, and you kind of just gotta realize, hey, I'm just acting every day to survive. If you take kind of that humble attitude, instead of saying you're trying to protect something about yourself, the truth is you're not helping yourself. By the way, did you guys know that Lim Junseo was in the Limelight music video? Uh, so he's just like a guy who's already part of a company, but I don't know, like he seems to be doing really bad in this show. In the actual performance, you could pinpoint the value of every member, as it started at a 7.5, and it reached up to an 8.2, and it fell again to a 7.9, and it fell because of Lim Junseo freezing up, kind of being stiff on stage. The performance, it should have been a gift to the team, and they could have given the other teams a run for their money. For their trouble, Chen Guanji got the top member for 696 points, kind of low, and then Lim Junseo got 491, which is strangely higher than Lee Dao got as his former star level test partner, and I don't think this was deserved at all. Lim Junseo should have gotten like a 200. The last team was Tomboy. Strangely, it wasn't all smooth sailing for these guys. Behind the scenes, they were ranking second in self-evaluation. Zhang Hao and Han Bin were having creative blocks, and really only Lee Ho-Tek and Park Gun-wook were practicing without much drama or airtime. So I never thought I'd see it, but Sang Han Bin, he is a human, and he showed his vulnerability this week over the pressure to perform after ranking so highly. So let me hit this bingo card for early fave experiences pressure. Honestly, I was concerned that Sang Han Bin might be a cold person and a bit mechanical, but now I see that my other inclination was kind of right, and that he was really just restraining himself. Actually, I think he is rising in the sincerity score for me after that. Zhang Hao, he was also humanized in this episode. In the actual performance, though, I thought it started with a weird energy. It was a 7.1, kind of one of the lowest I started with. And it really started to rise, probably because of Park Gun-wook's rap. And then later on, much more with the vocal ad-libs. And so these guys got the vocals right. They got the harmonies there. And that said, it still stopped at a 7.6 for me. And I actually didn't like this performance. In terms of the interpretation, and I kind of felt I was bored some of the time. And maybe it's because, boys should be trying to do a so-called tomboy energy. They should be going way more fierce because they're guys, not girls. And it actually seemed like they were moving in the opposite direction of Idol because there were boys softening themselves rather than becoming more fierce like the girls were doing. Now at the end, Zhang Hao got recognized and received 849 points. I think if the performance was more masculine, Han Bin could have gotten it. And it was also strange to put Gun-wook in that weird outfit, which I feel like they kind of intentionally softened his build so it wouldn't overpower the other guys in terms of masculinity. And honestly, he should have just got the killing part. So with that, that's all the live performances, and immediately after we were introduced to the audience voting results with winners from each category. Now my personal predictions turned out to be right. Tomboy, Love Killer, and Law won the audience votes, and while I am pleased to have guessed that, I didn't really feel like Tomboy did as well as they could have. I actually felt the performance was just predictable and weak, and if they didn't just eclipse their competition, or if they weren't lacking in their competition, they could have gotten smoked by, aces in other categories, if we're being real. The next mission, we're getting original songs and choreo. I'm not going to look into it. Like I said, I don't want to spoil things. But there was also a preview for Sports Day, which means I'll probably be able to check off another bingo card square when that comes around. A mystery star master also seems to appear. I'm not sure who it will be. There was a second Survivor announcement, and as usual, they don't spoil all the eliminations. I feel like they should have a next day episode, and they should have 2 days of episodes back to back. It just feels like it makes more sense for a show like this. That's how it is on American singing talent shows. And it gives them more space to breathe, more time to give everyone fair airtime. But in this one, they seem to only have one episode per week. And then they have special broadcasts randomly that don't really give you much information. They're just teasers. And so I guess that's pretty much it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you don't like it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comment box down below. Finally, if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, and then I'll see you in the next video.